Thank you, Ferdinand. I am very happy to be here today to talk about what's new in Angular. Today, I would like to talk a little bit about the state of Angular and take a look at the different changes that happened regarding the framework, the tooling in the recent version of Angular. Uh, like Ferdinand said, my name is Amadou Sall. I am a front-end software engineer from Senegal, but I have been living in France for 10 years now. I work for a company named Air France, where I help developers build great Angular applications. I am a Google developer expert in Angular and also an active member of the community. You can connect with me on social media or you can visit my blog, amadousall.com. So all the things that I will present today are public knowledge that you can find on the internet. You can go to the Angular CLI repository and the Angular framework repository to read all the commits and changelog on GitHub. But to save you some time, I have done that for you. And I want to cover all the changes that happened in V12, but I will cover what I think have the most impact on Angular developers. And instead of listing all the changes one by one, I have tried to group them into 4 logical categories. So I will start by talking about how Angular is moving away from the past. I will also discuss the new defaults and how they are better than the previous ones. I will talk about also, I will talk about the evolution of the tooling around Angular before ending my presentation by talking about what the future of Angular is, in my opinion. So Angular is moving away from the past. How? By removing support for old technologies. And the first of them is Internet Explorer, the favorite browser of all developers. So Internet Explorer is being deprecated in Angular 12. This means that you can still develop Angular applications that targets Internet Explorer, but you will see a warning. Support for Internet Explorer will be removed in Angular 13. And if you cannot just move away from IE today, you have at least 1 year because Angular 12 is a long-term support version of Angular. So you have 1 year, more than 1 year to plan moving away from IE. But my advice today is to go and try to convince the business, your business, that it is the right thing to do. Stopping to support Internet Explorer is the right thing to do today. The other thing is that Protector is deprecated. So Protector is no longer included in new Angular project as of version 12. So if you generate a new Angular application and you run ng E2E, you will see this message: cannot find E2E target for the specified project. You should add a package that implements end-to-end testing capabilities. And here we have 2 examples. The first one is Cypress, my favorite, and the other one is WebDriver.io. So if we have some time at the end of this presentation, I will show you how easy it is to add Cypress to your Angular application. And these packages are not maintained by the Angular team, but by their respective owners. And for Cypress, the cool thing is that they have an official guide on the Cypress documentation about migrating from Protector to Cypress, which is great. The other deprecation, and actually it is removed from Angular, it is TLSlint. And TLSlint have been deprecated for so long now. And in version 12, when you generate a new Angular application, there is no linter configured by default. So the same story here, if you run ngLint, you will have a message saying, cannot find linter target for specified project. You should add packages that implements linting capabilities. And for the linting story, well, there is no debate. We don't have a lot of option. The only option is to use ESLint. And also, if we have time at the end of this presentation, I will show you how easy to add linting to an existing Angular application. Now let's talk about the new defaults and why they are better. One of my favorite changes in the Angular CLI is that now we have production build by default. Before, when you run ng build, it will do a development build which is not very optimized and resulted in huge bundle size. Now, in Angular 12, when you do ng build, you have a production build, and the -- prod command line argument is deprecated. So today, ng build is tantamount to ng build -- configuration production. Once again, if we have time at the end of this presentation, I will try to explain how it works, because this is an area where there is a lot of confusion. You can still do a development build. So to do that, you run ng build and you pass it the configuration you want, in this case, development. You can also serve a development build. So before we could do ng build watch, and it would do a development build and serve it so that you can test it. Today, because the default mode is to build in production, well, there are some changes. And with version 12, we have a new helper script that is added to the package.json file when you new up a new Angular application. And basically, it just to do it does ng build -- watch and pass the development configuration. Another change in the default is strict mode. And in fact, this is not, strict mode is not something new in Angular 12. In Angular 11, we already had the strict fab, but it was opt-in. Now strict mode is enabled by default. So let's talk a little bit about why strict mode. Strict mode is a set of settings that will help you write more maintainable and more robust code. With strict mode, you will be able to catch so much bugs while authoring your code. So you don't have to wait at runtime to discover a lot of class of bugs. It also unlocks easier ng updates in the future, because the tooling will be able to do a better job of statically analyzing your Angular application. So strict mode is a win for you as a developer. It is also a win for the Angular CLI team for the ng updates. And it is also a win for your users, because with strict mode, we will have less bugs. So what is strict mode? If, well, you generate a new Angular application, like I said, it will generate a project in strict mode. So this will enable TypeScript strict mode. It will turn on strict Angular compiler flags, and also it will set up stricter bundle size budget. So TypeScript strict mode, so this is related not to Angular, but to TypeScript. And this is really, really something recommended to have a more maintainable code. And if you enable strict mode in TypeScript, it will enable a lot of strict checks, like strict null checks. So what strict null checks does is to dissociate null and undefined from your types. So if you have a strict mode enabled, you have to be more careful about your code. For example, you cannot just assume that a property, a variable is not null. You have to do if and check if this variable is null or undefined. So this will make your code more robust. It will also enable strict property initialization. So this will ensure that all your properties are initialized. So no more values that are left undefined. And the other one is no implicit any. And I believe that these three, strict null checks, strict property initialization, and no implicit any, are the most important things that will impact you as an Angular developer. But there are also some other things like not implicit this, strict bind call apply, strict function types, always strict, and so on and so forth. So when you run, when you use Angular in strict mode, it will also enable some recommended TypeScript flags, like force consistent casing in file name. This will ensure that all your files have the same construction. No implicit return, no fall through cases in switch, and so on and so forth. The second part of Angular strict mode is strict Angular compiler flags. And the most important one of them is strict template. What is strict templates? Just like TypeScript does a static analysis of your code, Angular also does the same for your templates. And there are three modes of template checking in Angular. Basic, basically you have no check on your templates. Full template checking, and the new one is strict mode. And this will allow you to catch a lot of bugs inside your templates. Well, I will pass these flags, strict injection parameters, and strict input access modifier. The third aspect of strict mode is stricter bundle sizes. So in V12 and in strict mode, the bundle size budgets have been reduced by, I think, 75%. So now your main bundle should be less than 500 kilobytes. So if it is more than that, you will see a warning. And if it is more than 1 megabyte, you will see an error. And by the way, there is an error on this slide because the limit before you get an error for your CSS is 4 kilobytes. So here it is 4 kilobytes, not 2 kilobytes for error. Another great feature of Angular 12 is critical CSS inlining by default. And what is critical CSS inlining? You need to know that when the browser loads your application, it has to wait to process the CSS before doing something else. So rendering your CSS is a blocking process. And what critical CSS does is it extracts the critical part of your CSS and inline it in your HTML, and the remaining part of your CSS will be loaded asynchronously. So this will avoid blocking your browser, and it will result in more performance. Same here for Google Fonts. When you import Google Fonts in your application, at build time, the Angular CLI will download the resulting CSS and inlining inside your HTML. We also have better tooling with Angular. One of them is hot module replacement. And once again, this is not a feature released with Angular 12. I think it has been released with Angular 11, but I think it is cool. That's why I want to mention it here. And what is hot module replacement? And don't confuse it with hot module reloading, because there is no reloading involved in this technology. Hot module replacement is a technology that exchanges, adds and removes modules while your application is running. So there is no reloading involved here. And it will help you retain your application state. So if you are working with forms and you have something entered in the input, with hot module replacement, when you make a change inside your code, you will not lose this state. And also HMR just updates what's changed. So it will result in faster feedback loop. So the refreshing of your page is faster. Another new thing about Angular is Webpack 5. And this should not have any impact on your application. It should be totally transparent, because when using Angular, we have the great Angular CLI that takes care of everything for us. So you should not see any downside by having Webpack as your bundler. On the contrary, you should see some improvement regarding build speed and bundle size. And the last, no, not the last, but one of the important benefits of Webpack 5 is a new feature called module federation, which unlocks micro front-end architecture in Angular. And by the way, in the Angular roadmap, they say that they are working to make it easy to build with micro front-end architecture in Angular. IV language service. Before V12, the Angular language service was using the Vue engine compiler, regardless of whether your app was using IV or not. And in V12, it has been completely rewritten in IV. Sorry. I think that this is specific to VS Code user. I don't use VS Code, I use WebStorm. But for VS Code user, this new IV language service should lead to a better developer experience with better type checking, better navigation capabilities, and most importantly, you will see in your IDE the same errors as in your terminal. So I think this is a huge win for VS Code users. Another great addition of Angular 12 is the Angular DevTools, which are the successor of Augury. Angular DevTools allows you, they are a Chrome extension, so it doesn't work for Firefox, but if you are using Chrome, you can enjoy this great extension that lets you explore the structure of your application and also debug the runtime performance of your apps. With the Angular DevTools, you can see the component hierarchy of your Angular application. You can view the properties of your Angular components and directive and update them directly inside your browser. You can also see when change detection runs and why. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the future of Angular. I think that Angular will be simpler for everyone, not only for expert, but also for beginners. And part of the Angular roadmap are things that I believe will simplify the mental model of Angular. The first one of them is optional ng modules. Modules are one of the most confusing part of Angular. Well, we have a lot of questions around modules. What is the difference between ng modules and JavaScript modules? What is import? What is export? So there are a lot of things to understand to be able to be successful with Angular modules. And Angular is the only framework that I know that have this concept of modules. When you are working with a framework like React, components are just functions that you can reuse by importing in another file. So today, the Angular team is busy working on making ng module optional. And I think this will make Angular more beginner friendly. And if you want to anticipate this change, maybe there is something you can do. And this is what I do in many of my projects now. This is to use a single component Angular module, meaning that whenever you want to create a new component, just create another module whose job is just to declare this component and to export it for other modules. We are also working towards single file components. Today, when you generate a new Angular component with the Angular CLI, for example, you have 3 files: a TypeScript file, an HTML file, and a CSS file. Do we really need to separate our TypeScript, our HTML, and our CSS? And why do we need that? Well, a lot of people will say separation of concern, but I don't think that separating these 3 files is a separating concern, because when working with a framework like Angular, the concern is the component, not just the TypeScript code or the HTML or the CSS. And having 3 different files just to build a small component is overkill. Well, I think we were obliged to have separate files to make it work for IDEs, because it was easier for them to give autocompletion if the file were separate. Also, the Angular CLI could not apply a preprocessor to inline files, but with Angular 12, we can now use SAS, for example, directly inside the add component style metadata. So I think this will unlock the possibility for us to do single file components. The Angular documentation is also getting better every day. We have now Dev on the Angular team who is leading the documentation effort, and Dev is a professional technical writer, and I see a lot of improvement in the Angular documentation and a lot of new content. We also have standardized error messages in Angular. Regarding documentation, with V12, we had a new guide on content projection that you can read to learn about content projection, how to use a single slot content projection, multi-slot content projection, and conditional content projection. And in the Angular roadmap also, they plan to add more guides on advanced concepts like very hard Angular topics, change detection and Zone.js. And also they will try to teach us how to perform, how to debug performance issues in Angular. So for the standard error messages, like I said, we have them. While developing your Angular application, if you have a runtime error, it will display an error code and point you to the documentation. So we have a documentation for expression change after checked error, circular dependency errors, no provider found, selector collision, and export not found, pipe not found. So if you go to the Angular docs, you will see the explanation on why these errors happen and how to solve the issue, which is great. Also, we have error codes for compiler, argument not literal, missing token, and so on and so forth. And these error messages, they follow a pattern. So they all start with ng, and the third element of this error code is the type. So 0 for runtime, and from 1 to 9, it is compiler error. And the fourth element is a runtime category. So it can be something internal to Angular, related to change detection, dependency injection, and so on and so forth. Okay. So I think also that we are moving towards a more consolidated ecosystem. Since Angular 9, Ivy is the default rendering engine, but Vue engine, the old rendering engine, was still around. And in V12, we are moving towards Ivy being the single rendering engine. And I think in the near future, maybe in Angular 13, we will only have Vue engine. So as of V12, Vue engine is deprecated for applications. So meaning that you cannot build your Angular 12 application using the Vue engine compiler. For libraries, well, there is the new Angular linker that will ease our way of working with Ivy for libraries. So the things that follows are my personal opinion, but I believe that the Angular team is being more transparent. I see more open discussion around Angular. I see more surveys and more RFCs. For example, well, the Angular team ran a survey asking about the most wanted post-CSS plugins. And in this survey, 90% of the participants, including myself, wanted Tailwind CSS. And I am glad to see that the Angular team is taking action based on the results of those surveys. So thanks to that, Tailwind CSS is now natively supported in Angular. And if you know me, you know that I really love Tailwind CSS. And Tailwind CSS is a utility-first CSS framework that help you build great user interfaces without writing a single line of CSS. Everything happens inside your HTML, and it will make you more productive. To use Tailwind CSS with Angular 12, and actually, I think it has been released. This feature has been released in Angular 11.2. So to use Tailwind CSS with Angular, what you need to do is install the Tailwind CSS package, npm install Tailwind CSS, add a tailwind.config.js file, and that's it. The Angular CLI will detect that you want to use Tailwind CSS, and it will add it to the post CSS plugins pipeline. So you can start using Tailwind CSS very easily in your Angular application. Like I said, I expect to see more RFCs within the Angular community, and we had a lot of them in the past months. We had an RFC regarding Ivy library distribution. We have an RFC regarding the deprecation of Protector, and also we had an RFC regarding Internet Explorer support deprecation. So now I think I have some time to show you some demo. I hope that my internet connection is fast today. So I have generated a new Angular application that is empty. And when I run ngLint, you will see this error message saying that cannot find lint, but it is very easy. Just copy and paste this command. And well, if the internet connection is great, I think it will be fast. Okay, so this work was done by James Henry. And thanks to him, we have now an easy way to add the ESLint to our Angular application. Command 9, and here we can see all the changes that happened inside the workspace. So we have here a new target, lint target, which is using the Angular ESLint builder developed by James Henry. And with that, now if I go back to the terminal, I can run ngLint. And it works. So I will just commit these changes. I will commit it as lint. So the same for ng E2E. And I want to add the support for Cypress. So I can run this command. Let's wait a little bit. I say, yes, I want to proceed. So while this one is installing, okay, I will say yes. Okay, while this one is installing, I just want to point out how the Angular default configuration works. So you see, you have this file, the angular.json file, and you can have here a list of projects. So in my project, I have only one application called ngLeipzig. You can see that it is of type application. We have some keys, schematics, and some other configuration. But the interesting part is this one, architect. And this is where all the targets we can run with Angular are defined. For example, when I run ngBuild, it will come here and see that I have something called build here, and it will use this configuration to do a build of my application. And this is what have changed in Angular 12. So you cannot see it here in the option, but the default options are now production configuration. So if I close this one, you can see here that we have some information for production, mainly the budget and file replacement. But yeah, this is not important for this talk. But we also have this new key where we just override these properties. So by default, with Angular 12, build optimizer is true, optimization is true, and so on and so forth. So we need to have an extra configuration for development mode. And this default configuration key also is very new in Angular 12. With this, when I run ng build, because I have here default configuration production, it will use this configuration. And if you want to go to the old behavior, you can still come here and replace this with development, but I would advise you not to do that. I guess now I have Cypress installed. Let's try to run ng e2e and see what happens. So the e2e command will first start my Angular application. That's why it is building it right now. Yes, and now, yeah, it is loading Cypress. Let's wait. Okay, so it is downloading Cypress. Okay, no problem. Let's be a little bit patient, and we will see our end-to-end test. Okay, so now we have the Cypress test running by just clicking here. I have just one spec that is generated by the Cypress schematics. And this one will fail because you can see here, it is expecting our application to contain this text, sandbox app is running. So to fix it, I will just replace ngLeipzig by sandbox and it should do the trick. So let me open the spec file and say ngLeipzig and save. And now you can see that my test passed. So this is all I had to share with you today. And if you have any question, I will be very happy to answer them. Thanks.